Hi, and welcome back to our presentation on asset maintenance and reserves. I just previously covered the first step in problem solving, which was the scope of the project. What comes next?
Well, we actually need to identify who's going to be responsible for the problem. Is it going to be the association, the homeowner, the tenant, the insurance company? And this may sound like a silly thing to do, but I live in a condo complex, so you've got a variety of people who could be involved. Everybody or just one entity could be responsible for it. We start by looking at governing documents. The governing documents are going to give you good guidance, maybe not complete guidance, but good guidance on who's going to be responsible. And keep in mind, you're in single-family homes, we're in condos, you're going to have differences within the documents. So let's say you know somebody who lived in a condo complex. Don't sit in your board meeting saying, yes, but my friend told me, because it's going to be different.
Well, I know one thing in the single-family home community: if there's a leak in the roof, it isn't the association's fault.
No, it's not. But in a condo complex, you're going to be calling the management company.
Exactly.
Roofs, pipes, paint, landscaping, walls, any of these could have shared responsibility. Right now, we're looking at possibly having shared responsibility with the city of Las Vegas. We're replacing a perimeter wall, and one vendor told us, oh, just take it down, put it back up, you're fine. $50,000 project. Another one came in and said, well, $121,000 because your footings may be under the city sidewalk. And if so, then you've got to pull it up, put the sidewalk back down. Suddenly, you've got a whole different situation, and before we could even take one brick down, we had to determine whether the city was involved, and if so, how much. Once you've looked at your CC&Rs, once you've looked at your bylaws and articles and incorporation, that's where you're going to look also at a plat map, which is what we ultimately did with our fence. And keep in mind, NRS 116, that could override everything, because sometimes there are specific identifiers in NRS that take precedence over your own documentation. On important matters or any time it's fuzzy, you always have to talk to an expert. You need to talk to maybe a general contractor who's outside the project, talk to your attorney, talk to your reserve specialist. Anytime anybody is unsure, you need to make that call and take that money out of the budget to pay for it. There are so many regulations that address how the board is supposed to make these decisions. On a really large project, where do you go?
Well, it's more involved than a large project, obviously. If you're just trimming the trees, it's probably not such a big deal. But there's this thing called the Commission on Common Interest Communities and Condominium Hotels. And this commission is responsibility for jurisdiction over HOAs and condos and how boards make their decisions. And there are two elements that are really important related to what the commission will consider in determining whether you as a board have made a reasonable business decision as a board member. And if you haven't, you can be in a whole lot of trouble. There's thousands of dollars of fines that can be assessed against the board because they didn't bother to check with someone who actually knew what was going on. So there's two areas. One is you must consult with professionals anytime it's a complex project that the average person wouldn't not be knowledgeable about. And even if you happen to be or happen to have on your board someone who's knowledgeable about it, those people aren't necessarily allowed to guide the board because they may have a conflict of interest. You must consult with professionals. The second thing is, having done that, you, when practicable is the operative word.
Practicable?
Practicable.
Don't you mean practical?
I wish that meant that, but it does not actually, because practical means, it's convenient, easy to do. It doesn't mean that. Practicable means it's possible, it's feasible, it can be done. Well, generally speaking, it can be done. I guess the only time it wouldn't be done is if you couldn't find enough vendors to give you 3 bids, which can happen in some cases. But the onus is on you as a board to make sure you've tried really hard to get those 3 bids. Unless a project is small and uses maybe an existing vendor that you have success with,
Okay, like
You need-
removing a tree that's buckling a sidewalk.
Yeah, you may use your landscaper for that,
Okay.
perhaps. But if you're going to remove 20 trees, you might want to go out for a proposal, for example. Consult your attorney before you decide not to go out for bid. If you think, I'm not sure, let's not go out for bid because it's going to take longer. Before you do that, run it by your attorney, make sure that he says or she says, yeah, in this case you don't need to do that, because they're the experts. And then you'll be following the advice of a professional. Mm-hmm. Anytime you're not sure whether you should go out for bid or not, talk to your attorney or just go out for bid. Unless a project is understood by the board, doesn't require special knowledge, consider hiring a specialist who's knowledgeable in that area. You may not be able to decide the scope of the project because you're not competent to know what's involved when the sewer pipe breaks and you need to get a plumber involved and excavators and you got to tear out some landscaping and so forth. It may need somebody to come in and advise you. So, your turn again.
Oh boy.
For some projects, timing is critical. You can't just do it whenever it happens. You have to have it done in a certain period of time. How do you know how long it's going to take? How do you do that? How do you make sure you have a finite time?
Well, a timeline is something that you need to establish as soon as you've selected your project. So you've gone through your documentation, you've got your project, you've figured out who's responsible, and now you're trying to create this process that everyone can follow so everyone stays on task with the entire project. When you're establishing a timeline, you don't just put in when the contractor is going to start the work on the wall and when he's expected to be finished. You need to...
That's what I want to know.
Well, but that's just a small part of your timeline. Think about it. Do you need to hire an expert? So we needed to get a general contractor in to take a look at that wall. We even had to get the city involved. You want to include that in your timeline. Create your RFP, which I always say incorrectly. Have your attorney take a look at it. Are you going to have to vet certain vendors before you even send out the bid? Then you've got to determine when you're going to have the bids returned. You need to identify if you're going to have a special meeting, maybe to open the bids or maybe just to talk to the homeowners that are going to be involved about it. Then you've got your project start and completion dates.
And all these things you got to schedule out.
Every single one of these things. Plus, then you've got a payment schedule. Your vendor needs to know when they can expect to be paid. Are you going to have to pay a deposit? When is final payment going to be made? And will final payment come with an inspection? Is that inspection going to require a specialist in order to come out and inspect? There are so many things that you've got to have identified in that timeline. And you shouldn't be afraid to hire an expert to help put it together. Your community manager does a lot of things, and they're brilliant at project planning, but they may need somebody to assist them like a general contractor to make sure we're hitting all the fine points in our timeline. You've got to do as much as possible in the preparation in order to make sure that when that start and end date comes, it goes extremely smooth. It's got to include every single item you can think of. And then as you do the project, you may come up with other things to add in. All the steps have to be there to start and complete every single project. So as I'm doing my fabulous project timeline, I come across this one line item, and you know I have a horrible time with this acronym, RFP, Request for Proposal. You thought a timeline sounded kind of intense, especially the way I do it, but an RFP, this looks like a lot of work, and I'm wondering if it's someplace I could save some time by kind of cutting it back a bit.
Well, you can. You can totally avoid the RFP process if you like.
I can?
You can. You might not like the results.
Okay.
Because that's the way you could, the RFP is the thing that allows you to communicate to the potential vendors what you're expecting them to do.
Oh,
and
okay.
if you, when you've gone through all this whole process of deciding what it is that needs to be done and how you're going to get it done and how long it's going to take, all that kind of information needs to be in your request for proposal. Lots of stuff, key dates, key responsibilities. An RFP stands for request, as you said, request for proposal. You're asking the vendor to propose to you something that you need. And so that's what the request for proposal is all about. You want to make sure the licensing information's in there, insurance requirements that your vendors, you want your vendors to have, and you know, for example, if it's a painting project, well, what kind of paint do you want? What's going to be painted?
Well, aren't the vendors going to come out and check out the property, and wouldn't they know what kind of paint?
Well, they might, or the low vendor might have chosen a paint that's not quite as good. And they might be painting a homeowner's fence instead of yours because you didn't exactly explain it. So the RFP is the document that you use to try to avoid those kind of problems. You want to include everything that your vendor is going to need to fully respond to your request. The request for proposal is going to ensure that your bidders are bidding on the same job. You know, the RFP is important because you may be looking, you don't want to have one vendor bidding an apple and somebody else bidding an orange and somebody else bidding a pear, especially when you wanted a banana. You want them to come back with what you want, not what they think you want or what they think you might need. They may provide you with some guidance and say, you know, maybe that banana is too large or maybe that banana is too green, but the point is they're dealing with you on what you're looking for. You don't want, if you do things verbally, avoid the whole process. Just say, well, we need this fence painted, and we need this. They'll come back with a proposal based on what they understood you said, or think that you said, or hope that you said, and they'll bid that because they're trying to get the contract. What you want is all those contractors bidding on the same thing. So your RFP is the document that you're communicating to them exactly what you want, how you want it, when you're going to pay, and so forth.
I guess that makes sense.
And the other thing is, if you don't ask for it, you're very unlikely to get it.
True.
So stay tuned for our final segment where we'll cover this process in completion.